48 North fans. This is 48 North Editor Joe Cline, and I'm here with Quantum Sails Loft owner and Raptor Deck owner Dan Kaseler. I had a question that's been lingering in my mind, and as I'm thinking about sailing, it's something that's I've just been turning over. So I thought I would ask one of the smartest sailors I know, and somebody who happens to also be a very accomplished sailmaker and sail designer. So here's a little bit of the context, Dan. More and more boats every day are using asymmetrical spinnaker shapes, not using poles, etc. And obviously that's true on performance racing boats. In the last few months, actually, I've been in a couple of boats where some really smart sailors on the boat have been urging the spinnaker trimmer, sometimes that's me, to sail the asymmetrical spinnaker with no luff curl at all. And that's a little bit different than how I think I was originally taught how to trim spinnakers. And so I was a little bit curious, is spinnaker design or our best thoughts and practices about spinnaker trim evolving to basically include a call that's more like no curl instead of like play the edge of the curl?
Well, I mean, there's a lot in that question. And I think if you asked a whole, gamut of pro sailors, you're going to get, a little bit different answers depending on their preference and their style of sailing. So when I talk about it, I guess I can just kind of talk from my perspective and my experiences and what my feelings are racing boats. It really depends a lot in some ways on the conditions and the type of boat. But I think one golden rule, a great golden rule that actually came from Jason Rhodes, who's a terrific sailor up in Canada. One day we were having a conversation about trimming, and he said they shouldn't call it spinnaker trimming, they should call it spinnaker easing. It shouldn't be the spinnaker trimmer, it should be the spinnaker easer. And I thought that was pretty funny at the time, but there's some truth in that a stalled kite or an over trimmed kite is much slower than one that's luffing a little bit or curling, which is what luffing would be. So when we're talking about A sails, I think we're talking, of course, about A1s, A2s, A3s, all the way through even zeros in some sense, A5s. It's a huge range of sails. And we're also talking about boats like J105s that spend a lot of time soaking low, walking on the bottom edge and trying to sail as downwind as possible, all the way up to maybe like a 49er or I-14 or some kind of multi-hull where you're kind of ripping downwind and you're jibing through sharper angles and apparent wind sailing. And so as we look at those types of, you're going to kind of change, that answer is going to change a little bit more. So if you're interested, I could talk to you a little bit about what I think in that sense.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. I mean, that was one of the follow-up questions, is how does this change for boats sailing in displacement mode versus a boat that's planing or, a multi-hull that's ripping really fast, whether the principles change. So I say dig into it if you like.
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, again, just one guy's feeling from what he's seen and the types of boat he's sailed. And a lot of this is based on, just being out there and sailing and feeling the boat and what's going fast. It's not wrapped up. In other interviews, I've talked a little bit more about the science behind it all. I think this is more of a gut feeling sort of discussion. But it seems that it's much quicker to not be stalled, particularly when you're in a mode like soaking low or on a boat like a J80, J105, where, the jump to planing is quite windy. So you spend a lot of time kind of walking the bottom edge of the window. On those boats in particular, or even a Melgus 24 when you're soaking low like you sail, Joe, on those boats in particular, you need to be very, very active with the sheet, and you're much better off having a curl than having the kite stalled, meaning that it's not curling. So for all those sailors out there, I would encourage you, and learning from the best trimmers that have sailed at my programs, or I've been part of other programs with great trimmers, I would definitely encourage everybody to be carrying a curl or nearly carrying a curl the whole time especially when you're working on soaking low.
Hmm. And when you're talking about an ideal amount of curl or playing that edge, um, I think spinnaker design has probably changed this a lot. The old rule of thumb that I was working off of when I was first learning spinnaker trim was kind of like one panel of curl. But is there an amount of curl that you think is more or less effective, or where does curl become too much in terms of loss of sail area or something else?
Yeah, I mean, curl is luffing. So, um, I mean, it's funny when you say that about, just to kind of go a little sideways here, but the first thing is when you're building a team and you're thinking about who's going to be your trimmer, you could teach somebody to trim a kite in about 30 seconds. To start with, you're like, okay, if it's not curling, let it out, and if it's curling, pull it in. Okay, go. Right, and that's it. Right, that's the first lesson, but there's so much more to it. But that's how everybody starts as a trimmer. And so you're looking for, at first, you're just looking for someone who can hyper focus and not be distracted by the other things going on the boat, and they're basically just letting out and pulling in, working on the curl. Of course, there's a lot more to it as guys get better. There's more you could talk about, but I think your question about how much it curls is a little bit challenging. You can't really see one panel because spinnakers have different panel layouts and different panel widths and stuff. But the main thing is to always be, if you're curling just a little bit, you're on the edge. The other way you can do it is you can put a telltale up there, or a series of telltales, which people do. I kind of find them a little bit useless, but if you're not the trimmer and you need to follow up on your trimmer guy and you look up there and you can see the telltale is stalled, which you'll find pretty often, meaning that it's flying backwards or hanging the wrong direction, you can be like, hey, Joe, what are you doing? Let that out. The trimmer should really be, if it's not nighttime and stuff, you should really be able to read the cloth, maybe more than the telltale. But even on the I-14, Chris and I, when I sail with Chris, we use a telltale on that spinnaker.
And in terms of that, the telltale reading, I mean, do you basically expect on the I-14 or something? I mean, we use telltales on the TP-52 as well. And so in more of a high performance setting like that, can you kind of trust the telltales? If they're both streaming, you're getting pretty good efficiency out of the kite, or do you still push beyond the telltales to try to encourage even a little bit more ease than the telltales would call for with the even airflow over each side of the sail?
Well, it depends a little how far back the telltales are placed. So the further the telltales are back from the luff, the less sensitive they will be. So they'll tell you what's happening a little bit late. On the I-14, for example, it's definitely possible. Just to talk about the more high performance boats quickly, and I know I'm jumping around a bit. While I said in a J105, J80, that kind of thing, you're soaking low, or one-off PHRF boat with an A sail, even an A sail on a pole, and you're trying to work down, then it's all about easing, and you're really walking the bottom edge of the window as much as you can. Still, of course, up in the lulls, down the puffs, all the basic ways to keep the kite moving and flowing. But as you get into these more high performance boats, the kites get flatter and twitchier. And so they go from a small curl to a nearly complete collapse. And that's true with a flat kite on a TP-52. If the boat's being sailed with, like a med cup level boat, they're going to sail pretty flat kite, and they're going to sail really sort of in this edge of the critical zone where they go from a curl to like a collapse pretty fast. So in this case, or like if you're out in the wire in an I-14, you tend to sheet a little bit harder than you would in the J105, meaning a little less curl. And part of that is just because it nets faster over the run, because you never have a collapse, right? It's twitchy, it's a flat kite, it's hard to keep it in the perfect spot going all the time. And so if you're one of these guys out here and you're planing downwind now, you're a little bow up, that window narrows up a bit, and you can't really carry, as much curl as you would in that soak low mode and be successful with it.
So could the same principles be sort of similarly applied for PHRF boats, that it would have different asymmetrical kites for running and reaching? Like the
Yeah.
flatter kites that are built for reaching, the 1s and 3s and 5s, generally you would sail those with less curl, whereas if you've got the A2 up, you're probably more likely to be running, obviously, because that's what the kite is built for, and therefore you should basically expect to be sailing with more curl. So even though it's the same boat, as the spinnaker design changes, then you also want the trim style to change a little bit.
That's correct. Yeah, that's how I would view it. I mean, maybe in a perfect world, you would be able to carry. Yes, that's just correct. What you said is correct. Maybe it's not to say you want to sail around with this thing oversheeted or with the sheet not moving. But the penalties are less. I mean, the losses are less, and um, avoiding this like catastrophic collapse becomes, part of the game plan as a trimmer in that mode.
Nice. Well, I think that helps give a lot of context to my little wondering. I'll just add one more follow-up. A-sails are often used now for cruising designs as well. And I think most of the cruising boats I've been on tend to over trim just a tick, and that way they can cleat it off. But in terms of the differences between more performance designs or more cruising designs and some of the techniques that the average cruising sailor might apply based on this conversation, is there any best practice or rule of thumb that changes in terms of its philosophy for cruisers?
Well, I mean, one thing is the sail designs change. Typically, a cruising kite, a lot of times it's tacked to the anchor roller on the bow of the boat, something like this. The tack might even be above the bow pulpit. Um, Generally speaking, Quantum does a fantastic job of building these kites that are really forgiving. They're generally sort of like an A3 shape, but even that's kind of, maybe they should have their own definition as cruising kites. They're made to be, they're sort of the all-in-one getter done, in that they're kites that work okay when they're stalled, and you can sail pretty close on them and you can sail pretty deep on them. They're not going to win any boat races, but those are sort of the hit points. And so those shapes have sort of evolved to be extremely forgiving. And so for the cruising guys, it should be pretty easy, and it's not such a big deal to sail around without the kite curling at all. Most of my cruising kite customers, they're going to set the sheet on a self-tailing winch in about the right place, and they're going to kind of steer to it and enjoy a day out on the Sound or up in the island. So as far as trimming for those guys, it's a little less critical. And those kites from Quantum and from the other brands are should be targeted at making those kites fly over that range. Whereas the racing product is really like, you're looking for inches, and those kites are more sensitive, and they really, you really can benefit from a super attentive trimming and a good communication between the trimmer and the driver.
Terrific. Well, hopefully the 48 North readers and fans will enjoy this great information. Yeah, Dan, thank you so much. And we'll look forward to seeing you out on the water, hopefully sooner rather than later.
Yeah, well, I hope everybody's staying safe and healthy and washing their hands. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm trying to get my boat ready so I can come race against you someday.
Love it, dude. Well, thanks again, and keep in touch.
All right. Cheers, everybody. Yep.